A millionaire comes home unannounced and finds a silence that doesn't match the home he built. Following a muffled cry, he discovers his stepmother locking his twin daughters in the basement. What he sees there changes forever everything he believed about his family. Overwhelmed by fury and guilt, he does something unimaginable. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the grand Westchester mansion as Michael Henderson pulled into his circular driveway 3 hours earlier than expected. His business meeting in Manhattan had concluded sooner than anticipated, and for once, he looked forward to surprising his family. The imposing colonial-style home stood majestically against the darkening sky, its windows glowing warmly in the evening light. Michael had worked tirelessly for 15 years to afford this dream house, believing it would provide the perfect environment for his 6-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. As he stepped through the mahogany front door, an unusual silence greeted him. No sounds of children playing, no cartoons echoing from the living room, no cheerful chatter that typically filled the spacious hallways. Victoria, his wife of 3 years, was nowhere to be seen either. The house felt hollow, almost eerily quiet for a Tuesday evening when the girls should have been having dinner. Michael loosened his silk tie and called out, "Victoria, Emma, Sophie?" His voice echoed through the marble-floored foyer, but no response came. He checked the kitchen first, finding it spotless and untouched, with no signs of dinner preparation. The living room was equally pristine, with perfectly arranged throw pillows and not a single toy in sight. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. As he moved toward the staircase to check the bedrooms upstairs, a faint sound caught his attention. It was barely audible, like a distant whimpering or crying. Michael paused, straining his ears, to locate the source. The sound seemed to be coming from below, from the direction of the basement. His heart began to race as he followed the muffled sounds down the hallway toward the basement door. The heavy wooden door was closed, and when Michael tried the handle, he found it locked from the outside. The crying became more distinct now, and his blood ran cold as he recognized the voices of his daughters. They were calling for help, their young voices trembling with fear and desperation. His hand shook as he pressed his ear against the door, hearing Emma's voice pleading, "Please, we'll be good, we promise, please let us out." "Emma, Sophie," Michael called through the door, his voice thick with panic. The crying intensified, and he could hear both girls sobbing his name. "Daddy? Daddy, is that you? Please help us, it's so dark down here." Michael's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. His daughters, his precious little girls, were locked in the basement, crying and begging for help. The successful businessman who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals felt utterly powerless in this moment. He rattled the door handle desperately, but the lock held firm. "Where's the key?" he shouted to no one in particular, his voice echoing through the empty house. He ran to the kitchen, frantically searching drawers and cabinets for a spare key or something to break the lock. His hands trembled as he pulled out every drawer, scattering contents across the granite countertops. It was then that Victoria appeared, stepping calmly through the French doors that led from the patio. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the rain outside. In her manicured hands she carried a small silver key. "You're home. Early," she said with an unsettling smile, as if nothing unusual was happening. "How was your meeting with the investors?" Michael stared at her in disbelief. "Victoria, our daughters are locked in the basement. I can hear them crying. What's going on?" Victoria's expression remained eerily calm as she twirled the key between her fingers. "They disobeyed me, Michael. I specifically told them not to touch my antique vase collection in the living room, and they deliberately knocked one over while I was on a conference call with the Children's Foundation. Children need to learn consequences for their actions." "Consequences?" Michael's voice rose to a near shout. "They're 6 years old, Victoria. They're terrified down there. Give me that key right now." "You're overreacting," Victoria replied coolly, but Michael had already reached for the key. She pulled it away, but he was stronger and more determined. As he snatched it from her grasp, Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly. "You're spoiling them, Michael. They need discipline, structure. My charitable work with underprivileged children has taught me that permissive parenting only creates behavioral problems later in life." Michael didn't waste time responding. He rushed to the basement door, his hands shaking as he inserted the key. The lock clicked open, and he pulled the door wide, calling down into the darkness. "Emma! Sophie! Daddy's here!" The basement stairs creaked under his weight as he descended into the dim space. The twins were huddled together behind a stack of storage boxes in the far corner, their small bodies trembling. Their faces were streaked with tears, their eyes red and swollen from crying. When they saw him, they didn't immediately run to his arms as he expected. Instead, they hesitated, looking uncertain and frightened. "It's okay," Michael whispered, kneeling down and opening his arms. "Daddy's here now, you're safe." Slowly, tentatively, Emma stepped forward first, followed by Sophie. As Michael embraced them, he felt how thin they had become, how fragile their small bodies felt against his chest. Their hair was disheveled, and he noticed they were still wearing the same clothes they had worn to school that morning, but now they were wrinkled and damp. "We were so scared, Daddy," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "It was so dark, and we couldn't find the light switch." Sophie, usually the more talkative of the twins, remained silent, clinging to his shirt with tiny fists. Michael's heart broke as he realized the depth of their fear. These children, who used to run to greet him every evening with hugs and stories about their day, now seemed almost afraid to trust him completely. As he carried both girls upstairs, Michael's mind raced with questions and a growing sense of guilt. How long had this been happening? How had he missed the signs? He had been traveling frequently for business over the past several months, often leaving Sunday evening and not returning until Friday. He had trusted Victoria completely with the girls' care, believing her love for them was genuine. Victoria was waiting in the living room when they emerged from the basement, her arms crossed and her expression defensive. "You're making a bigger deal out of this than necessary, Michael. Timeouts are a normal part of parenting. My own mother used similar methods when I misbehaved as a child." "A timeout is sitting in a corner for 5 minutes, not locking children in a dark basement for hours," Michael replied, his voice strained with controlled anger. The twins pressed closer to him, as if seeking protection. Over the next few days, Michael began to notice details he had previously overlooked. The girls seemed unusually quiet during meals, eating quickly and asking permission before speaking. They flinched when Victoria approached them, and he caught them glancing nervously at her when they thought no one was looking. Emma had developed a habit of hoarding snacks in her backpack, and Sophie had started wetting the bed, something she hadn't done since she was 3 years old. Michael's successful career had taught him to gather evidence before making important decisions. If he was going to confront this situation properly, he needed proof of what was happening in his home when he wasn't there. The thought of his daughters suffering while he was away in boardrooms made him physically ill, but he forced himself to think strategically. He contacted a discreet security company, explaining that he wanted to upgrade the home security system. Over the weekend, while Victoria was attending a charity luncheon, professional installers placed tiny, nearly invisible cameras in key locations throughout the house. The main camera was positioned to monitor the basement door and surrounding hallway. Additional cameras were installed in the kitchen, near the girls' bedrooms, and in the main living areas. The cameras were connected to a secure cloud storage system that Michael could access from his phone or laptop, regardless of his location. He told Victoria the new system was necessary due to recent break-ins in the neighborhood, which she accepted without question. After all, she had always been supportive of his business decisions and security concerns. What Michael discovered over the following weeks was far worse than he had initially feared. The recordings revealed a pattern of systematic neglect and emotional abuse that made his stomach turn. Victoria would deny the girls' meals, claiming they hadn't finished their vegetables from the previous day or had been disrespectful during breakfast. When they asked for food, she would become irritated and dismissive, telling them that ungrateful children don't deserve treats. The basement punishments were not isolated incidents. The cameras captured Victoria dragging the crying girls downstairs for infractions as minor as leaving crayons on the coffee table or speaking too loudly while she was on the phone. The longest recorded punishment lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes, during which the girls could be heard pleading and crying in the darkness below. In one particularly disturbing recording, Victoria stood at the top of the basement stairs, calmly, eating lunch while the twins called for her from below. She ignored their pleas completely, scrolling through her phone as if their distress was nothing more than background noise. When she finally let them out, both girls were disoriented and stumbling, their faces pale and eyes unfocused. Michael documented everything meticulously. He created encrypted files for each incident, noting dates, times, and detailed descriptions of what the cameras had captured. He cross-referenced these events with his travel schedule and discovered that the worst abuse always occurred when he was out of town. Victoria was careful to maintain her perfect stepmother facade whenever he was present. The financial records told an equally disturbing story. Michael had set up a dedicated account for the girls' expenses, including food, clothing, activities, and educational materials. When he reviewed 8 months of bank statements, he discovered that virtually no money had been spent on Emma and Sophie. Instead, the funds had been redirected to Victoria's personal expenses, luxury spa treatments, expensive jewelry, high-end restaurants, and home decorating projects. Meanwhile, the girls had been wearing the same clothes repeatedly. Their shoes were too small for their growing feet, and their bedroom had not been updated or improved in any way. Michael found receipts showing that Victoria had spent more money on a single handbag than she had on both girls combined over several months. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Michael realized that his daughters had been suffering emotional and physical neglect for months while he focused on expanding his business empire. The guilt was crushing, but it also fueled his determination to protect them and seek justice for what they had endured. He began researching family law attorneys and child psychology specialists, knowing that he would need expert testimony to support his case. The recordings were powerful evidence, but he wanted to ensure that every legal avenue was properly explored. Emma and Sophie deserved not just protection, but also the therapeutic support they would need to heal from their traumatic experiences. As he prepared to take action, Michael made a solemn promise to his sleeping daughters. He would never again prioritize business over their well-being. He would be the father they deserved, the protector they needed, and he would move heaven and earth to ensure their safety and happiness. The successful businessman was about to face the most important battle of his life, and this time failure was not an option. Dr. Sarah Chen, the school psychologist at Greenwood Elementary, had been observing the Henderson twins with growing concern for several weeks. Emma and Sophie, once vibrant and engaged students, had gradually withdrawn from classroom activities and social interactions. Their artwork had become particularly troubling, featuring recurring themes of locked doors, darkness, and figures trapped behind bars. When Michael contacted Dr. Chen, requesting an urgent meeting, she already had extensive documentation of the girls' behavioral changes. Her office, decorated with cheerful children's drawings and comfortable seating areas, provided a safe space for their conversation. "Mr. Henderson," Dr. Chen began carefully, "I've been meaning to reach out to you about Emma and Sophie. Their teachers and I have noticed significant changes in their behavior over the past few months." Michael felt his stomach tighten as he sat across from the professional woman who had clearly been trained to recognize signs of distress in children. "What kind of changes?" Dr. Chen opened a thick folder containing the twins' recent schoolwork and psychological assessments. "They've become increasingly withdrawn and anxious. Emma hoards food from the cafeteria, hiding crackers and fruit in her desk. Sophie has started having panic attacks during fire drills, specifically when we practice evacuation procedures that involve dark spaces." She showed Michael several drawings the girls had created during art therapy sessions. In one, 2 small figures sat behind black bars, their faces blank and expressionless. Another showed a house with all the windows covered in dark scribbles, with 2 tiny shapes visible in the basement area. "Most concerning," Dr. Chen continued, "is this drawing Emma made last week." She placed a piece of construction paper on the desk, showing 2 girls with their mouths covered, standing next to a tall figure in a dress. Above the scene, Emma had written in shaky letters, "We can't tell." Michael's hands trembled as he examined his daughter's artwork. The evidence of their psychological trauma was devastating, but it also provided crucial documentation for the legal battle he knew was coming. Dr. Chen agreed to prepare a comprehensive psychological evaluation and testify, if necessary, about the children's condition and the clear indicators of emotional abuse. Armed with video evidence, financial records, and expert psychological testimony, Michael met with Rebecca Morrison, one of New York's most respected family law attorneys. Her Manhattan office overlooked Central Park, and her walls were lined with certificates and awards recognizing her advocacy for children's rights. "This is one of the most comprehensive documentation cases I've seen," Rebecca told Michael after reviewing the evidence. "The video recordings are particularly powerful, but we need to be prepared for Victoria's legal team to challenge their admissibility and question the circumstances under which they were obtained." Rebecca explained that Victoria had already hired Douglas Blackwood, a prominent defense attorney, known for representing high-profile clients in custody disputes. Blackwood had connections throughout the New York legal system and a reputation for aggressive tactics that often intimidated opposing counsel. Within days of Michael filing for emergency custody and divorce proceedings, Victoria launched a counterattack that caught him off guard. She held a press conference on the steps of the Westchester County Courthouse, flanked by supporters from various charitable organizations where she served on boards of directors. "I am devastated that my husband has chosen to destroy our family with false accusations," Victoria declared to the assembled reporters, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "As someone who has dedicated my life to helping underprivileged children through my charitable work, I am appalled that anyone would suggest I would harm Emma and Sophie, whom I love as if they were my own daughters." The media coverage was extensive and largely sympathetic to Victoria. Her public image as a philanthropist and advocate for children's causes provided a stark contrast to Michael's portrayal as a workaholic businessman who was rarely home. Social media campaigns sprung up supporting Victoria, with hashtags like Save Victoria Henderson and Justice for Stepmoms trending on various platforms. Douglas Blackwood's strategy became clear during the first court hearing. He systematically attacked every piece of evidence Michael had gathered, arguing that the video recordings had been obtained without consent and violated privacy laws. He portrayed Michael as an obsessive, controlling husband who had become paranoid and vindictive after years of neglecting his family for business interests. "Your Honor," Blackwood argued with polished confidence, "my client has been subjected to surveillance in her own home, where she believed she had reasonable expectation of privacy. These recordings represent a clear violation of her constitutional rights, and any evidence obtained through such means should be excluded from consideration." The judge, Honorable Margaret Walsh, appeared sympathetic to these arguments. She had presided over hundreds of custody cases and had seen numerous instances where bitter spouses manufactured or exaggerated evidence to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. The preliminary hearing did not go as well as Michael had hoped, and he left the courthouse feeling defeated and uncertain. It was during this low point that Maria Santos emerged as an unexpected ally. Maria had worked as a housekeeper for the Henderson family for 2 years before Victoria dismissed her 6 months earlier, claiming budget constraints. In reality, Maria had been let go because she had witnessed too much and was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the twins' well-being. Maria contacted Michael through Rebecca Morrison's office, explaining that she had extensive documentation of Victoria's treatment of the girls. She had secretly photographed bruises on the children's arms and legs, taken pictures of their sparse meals, and recorded voice messages on her phone where Victoria explicitly instructed her to ignore the girls' requests for food or bathroom breaks. "She told me the girls were manipulative and attention-seeking," Maria explained to Michael and Rebecca in Spanish, with an interpreter present. "She said they needed to learn that crying and begging would not get them what they wanted. When I tried to give them snacks or comfort them, Mrs. Henderson became very angry and threatened to call immigration services on me." Maria had also saved text messages from Victoria containing explicit instructions about restricting the children's food and activities. One message read, "The girls are not to have dinner tonight. They spilled juice on my white sofa and need to learn consequences. Do not give them anything to eat after 2 p.m. However, Maria's courage was tested when Victoria's legal team discovered her involvement in the case. Douglas Blackwood hired private investigators who revealed Maria's undocumented immigration status and threatened to report her to federal authorities if she continued cooperating with Michael's attorneys. The intimidation campaign was subtle but effective, and Maria became increasingly fearful about testifying. Rebecca Morrison worked with immigration advocates to secure temporary protection for Maria, arguing that she qualified for whistleblower protections due to her testimony about child abuse. This legal maneuvering bought them time, but it also demonstrated the lengths to which Victoria's team would go to silence witnesses. During this period, Michael had moved Emma and Sophie to a secure apartment in Manhattan, closer to their school and therapy appointments. The girls were slowly beginning to heal, but the trauma had left deep scars. Emma started calling him Daddy again, but Sophie remained largely nonverbal except during therapy sessions. One evening, as Michael was reading bedtime stories to the girls, Sophie suddenly broke her silence. "Daddy, is Victoria going to come take us back to the dark room?" Michael's heart shattered as he realized the depth of their fear. "No, sweetheart. Daddy will never let anyone hurt you again. You're safe now, and you'll always be safe." But even as he made this promise, Michael struggled with his own demons. The investigation and legal proceedings had consumed his life completely, and he found himself obsessively controlling every aspect of the girls' environment. He monitored their activities constantly, screened their interactions with other adults, and rarely let them out of his sight. Late one night, as he watched them sleeping, Michael realized with horror that his protective instincts were becoming unhealthy for both him and his daughters. He began attending therapy sessions himself, working with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in trauma recovery for families affected by child abuse. Dr. Walsh helped him understand that healing required balance and that the girls needed to learn to trust other adults again, not just rely on him, for all their emotional and physical needs. The breakthrough in the legal case came from an unexpected source. A computer forensics expert examining Victoria's digital devices discovered that all her email and social media accounts were automatically backed up to cloud storage. Hidden in these backups were hundreds of photos and videos that Victoria had taken herself, documenting what she apparently viewed as successful discipline sessions. One video showed the twins begging for food, while Victoria calmly explained to the camera that children needed to understand the consequences of wasteful behavior. Another showed Emma and Sophie locked in the basement, while Victoria described their punishment as character building and compared it to the discipline she provided to disadvantaged children through her charity work. Most damaging was a recording where Victoria spoke directly to the camera, saying, "Michael thinks I'm too soft on these girls. If he only knew how much structure and discipline I've provided while he's been away building his business empire, these children would be completely spoiled without my intervention." The authenticity of these recordings was unquestionable, as they were created by Victoria herself and stored on her own devices. Douglas Blackwood's previous arguments about privacy violations and manufactured evidence crumbled in the face of Victoria's own documentation of her actions. As the case moved toward trial, additional witnesses came forward. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly neighbor, testified that she had frequently heard children crying from the Henderson property, particularly during evening hours, when Michael was known to be traveling. James Rodriguez, the mailman, reported seeing the twins looking thin and frightened whenever he encountered them in the yard. Most powerfully, Dr. Sarah Chen presented her psychological evaluation of Emma and Sophie, documenting clear signs of complex trauma, emotional neglect, and systematic psychological abuse. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of two children who had been deliberately terrorized and deprived by someone who was supposed to protect them. The final hearing took place on a gray December morning in Westchester County Family Court. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, child advocacy groups, and supporters from both sides. Michael sat with Rebecca Morrison, feeling the weight of months of legal battles and the hopes for his daughter's future. Victoria took the stand in her own defense, maintaining her composure throughout most of Douglas Blackwood's questioning. She repeated her claims about providing necessary discipline and structure, portraying herself as a dedicated stepmother who had sacrificed her own comfort for the sake of two difficult children. However, under cross-examination by Rebecca Morrison, Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. When pressed about specific incidents documented in the videos, she became defensive and angry. Her responses grew increasingly erratic as Rebecca systematically dismantled her explanations. The turning point came when Rebecca played one of Victoria's own videos showing the twins locked in the basement while she described their punishment in detail. As the courtroom listened to the children's desperate pleas echoing from the speakers, Victoria suddenly stood up and shouted, "I never asked to be a mother to children who aren't even mine. They're manipulative and ungrateful, and they deserved every moment of discipline I gave them." The courtroom fell silent. Victoria's outburst had revealed the true depth of her resentment and callousness toward Emma and Sophie. Even Douglas Blackwood looked stunned by his client's emotional breakdown. Judge Walsh's decision was swift and unequivocal. She awarded full custody to Michael, ordered Victoria to pay for all medical and psychological treatment expenses, and recommended that the district attorney's office investigate potential criminal charges for child endangerment and neglect. As they left the courthouse, Michael knelt down to embrace Emma and Sophie on the steps, where Victoria had once proclaimed her innocence to the media. This time, the reporters captured a different scene, a father reuniting with his daughters and promising them a future filled with love, security, and healing. The months that followed were challenging, but filled with hope. Emma and Sophie slowly regained their confidence and joy. They made new friends at school, excelled in their studies, and began participating in activities they had been denied during Victoria's reign of control. Emma learned to play the piano, while Sophie discovered a love for painting that produced artwork filled with bright colors and happy scenes. Michael kept his promise to prioritize fatherhood over business success. He restructured his company to allow for remote work, attended every school event and therapy session, and created new family traditions that emphasized love, communication, and trust. The girls learned to ride bicycles in Central Park, visited museums together, and spent evenings reading stories and sharing dreams for the future. On the first anniversary of their legal victory, Michael and the twins visited a children's advocacy center where they volunteered to share their story with other families facing similar situations. Emma and Sophie, now confident 8-year-olds, spoke about the importance of telling trusted adults when something doesn't feel right. "Sometimes grown-ups do things that hurt children," Emma told a group of young listeners, "but there are always other grown-ups who will help you stay safe." Sophie added with a bright smile, "And now we get to help other kids know they're not alone." As they walked home through Manhattan's evening lights, the twins chattering excitedly about their upcoming science fair project, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The successful businessman had discovered that his greatest achievement was not any corporate deal or financial milestone, but rather the healing and happiness of 2 little girls who had taught him the true meaning of unconditional love and protection. Their story became a beacon of hope for other families, proving that with courage, determination, and the support of caring professionals, even the darkest situations could be transformed into new beginnings filled with light and possibility.